Hi, welcome to financialexpress.com. This is our budget special series, and I'm in conversation with Gaurav Karnik of E&Y. We're going to start with discussing about corporate taxes and how and what to expect for the next week when Budget 27 is going to be unveiled by Finance Minister Arun Jaitley. So, Gaurav, it's a pleasure to be in conversation with you. You are the tax expert, and we have some questions lined up for you. And our readers are going to be very excited to hear what you have to say
Sure,
about
thanks.
it. One of the things that the industry is pitching for right now is that they want a corporate tax cut rate, which is they're saying they're pitching for 25%. You have CII, saying that it should be reduced, brought down to 18%. What is your take on it, and what do you think is going to be the roadmap ahead when we see the budget?
So the finance minister in his first budget had already announced a roadmap to 25%. That was going to be done over a 4-year period. So I think what the expectation really is that 25 is the bottom which he had already agreed to, and I don't think he's going to go below 25 on the corporate tax rate. But this time in this time's budget, I don't think he's going to make a drastic cut from 30 to 25, because that's a large amount of change which is required, and may not have the budget, fiscal resources to support it. But I would really clearly think that there should be at least a 2 or 3% cut from 30 is the expectation. And 18, I think, is a very much an aspirational rate. That's quite a low rate. And if at all the 18 number, that could be a change in the MAT rate, which is today 18.5 plus surcharge over 20%. So consequently, along with the cut in the corporate tax rate to say 27 or 26, one could look at the MAT also going down, so that it becomes an effective thing. So the gap between the corporate tax rate and the MAT rate is not so significant. I mean, it's significant to warrant the use of MAT.
Thank you. What about when we compare India with, say, the global economies, maybe Asian economies? How do we look at the corporate tax scenario there? What is the rate like?
Yeah, so India is amongst the highest. If you look at the Asia Pac or the tiger economies in Asia, if you look at Singapore, they're at 17%. If you look at Vietnam, it's around 17 to 20%. So most of them are lower than India. So clearly, as in this world of tax competition, there will be a need to cut the tax rate. And I think the bigger problem is going to be the United States cutting its tax rate down, as President Trump has been saying. And once tax rates come down in US, that becomes a serious competition for the rest of the world. So clearly, this budget will I think really force the finance minister to relook at the corporate tax rate and come up with a significant cut.
So in a way, you're saying that there could be a pressure with Trump coming in, that our budget may also reflect a certain tweaking on that ground, or? Yeah,
if the US tax rates come down, which are significantly high, they're over 40%. If they come down to the rates he's promising, then that clearly will signal a shift. There will be a lot of competition from the United States for competing resources. Plus, if you look at Asia around, the countries which are here, already they are much lower than us. Right. So clearly there is a need to cut the corporate tax rate. And given all the current circumstances which are there, and also what the industry expects, I think there should be clearly a cut in the tax rate, in the corporate tax rate.
And also, given the pain of demonetization that the country has been going through, do you feel it would be justified to expect a higher,
So I think demonetization, of course, there have been some pains. So clearly there is a need to, alleviate some of those pains. And I think cutting the tax rates, both on corporate tax rate as well as some relief on the personal tax side, will clearly help. So, there is an expectation because of that also, as another factor which is, asking for this cut.
Totally. I agree with you. What about startups? Because there's been a lot of emphasis on, encouraging startups. We have Startup India and other initiatives by the government. So do you think startups should have a flatter tax rate structure? Do you think the FM should bring in something on those lines? What are your points you take?
Yeah, I think the tax holiday which was brought in by the government a few years ago, that suggests a tax holiday period which really does not help in startups. By the time the tax holiday period really kicks in, the profit, there are no profits at that time. So during the course of the tax holiday period, normally the startup won't have really made any profit. So really this tax incentive doesn't work. So your idea that you just mentioned, that a flatter rate or some sort of a lower rate for startups, I think would be a better idea than having a tax holiday which doesn't really work today.
Right. And when it comes to litigation, that is one of the things that companies are very apprehensive about, because we are known to have, at least India is perceived to have a litigative framework which is not very conducive for businesses. So now, do you think the FM probably could consider bringing in a new ADR system wherein litigation, companies don't get stuck in the litigative process, and there's more speedy arbitration or some other dispute?
Yes, so I think in the last couple of years since the new government has come in, the tax authorities have been less adversarial. The APA program, or the Advanced Pricing Agreement program, has been a significant success and we have seen a lot of companies go in for that program, and also that tax authorities have been very reasonable in their judgments there. Secondly, last year there was some more changes brought in on when you should be disputing certain tax demand, and there were certain thresholds at which the tax authorities had to go for an appeal or not go for an appeal. So clearly from the ministry side there has been an attempt to reduce litigation.
Right.
And I think the attitude also of the government has been to end it or reduce it to the extent possible. One of the suggestions I think we have is that from the authority for advance rulings there is only one bench today, which is in Delhi. So I think there's a need, and the finance minister had announced it a couple of budgets ago that he would introduce more benches for this advance ruling authority. So I think that's something which he has to operationalize this year, and also make sure that there are enough adequate members on those benches,
right,
so that these rulings are passed. I think that would be a added thing which is needed right now.
I have two related questions to what you just mentioned. One was the threshold point that you talked about. Is it within the framework of a legislation that you mentioned, or it's in practice that it's being...
No, there's a circular which has been given,
okay,
and there are thresholds which are put into it.
Okay, so it's a notification.
It's an internal circulation, which is a circular which is there.
Okay. The other thing you mentioned was setting up more benches. Now, if we have more benches across the country, does it really help in reducing disputes at a lower rate, at a faster, speedier rate, or will it fragment the system?
So the authority for advance ruling is basically taken in for a particular transaction which is going to take place.
Okay.
So this in advance of a particular assessment taking place, you get a ruling from the authority.
Right.
So this kind of cuts the litigation and brings tax certainty. Either we win at the win at the ruling, then we accept, and the tax authority accepts it and doesn't go ahead. So this kind of cuts litigation because you don't go through the assessment process till we get the ruling.
So for what you're saying is, for companies, it's a win-win situation that the government is sort of brought in.
Will be, if it can bring in the benches, yes, it will be.
That's great. I would like to know your take on the ease of doing business in India right now compared to what it was, say, 10 years ago. Do you see a difference after this government has come in and pushed through with initiatives for ease of doing business? Yeah,
so I think a lot of changes have been made. A lot of things have been made electronic. A lot of the filings also in the Income Tax Act from last year, we have been allowed to file submissions electronically. One doesn't really have to go to the tax office if one doesn't want to, and you can do it all electronically. So that's quite a change. The other thing from an ease of doing business, I think single window clearances in as many sectors as possible is really required. Especially manufacturing, where it takes time to set up a factory. I think a single window clearance there would really work. Another sector which is which can create jobs and impacts the GDP is real estate. There also you have a plethora of approvals, and that's really a place where you need a single window clearance as well. So I think manufacturing, real estate, both of them, if they can have single window clearances, one could really make a change in the ease of doing business, and that will really go up the rankings.
Wonderful. You mentioned the part about manufacturing, and that brought me to another aspect of Make in India. So how do you see the budget 2017 probably doing a little more to strengthen the initiatives that are already going on board?
So one of the things I think would be clearly the corporate tax rate. Dropping the corporate tax rate makes it a competitive to produce in India. The second is on the depreciation, there's a change in law which is resulting in everything being taxed at a 40% depreciation rate. So before there used to be for certain sectors like renewables, it used to be 80% or 100% accelerated depreciation was available. So what is really required is that we should, at least in certain sectors, we should restore the depreciation rate to the earlier rates rather than having a flat 40% rate. That could really help also in pushing through some of the initiatives on Make in India. And last but not least is on the R&D expenses. There's a move to phase out that incentive. I think one of the suggestions is that he should try and retain that incentive, because if he wants innovation to result here, then one needs to spend on R&D. And if the R&D incentive really would help in bringing innovation back into India as well.
You've given us a lot of interesting insights on corporate tax and what analysts and India Inc. can expect from Budget 2017. One last question before we wrap up. Any out-of-the-box ideas that you think that FM may surprise us with and bring a smile to our faces, at least for corporate India?
Well, if he really does the 25% rate, cuts the rate to 25%, that will be a big change.
Thank you so much, Gaurav.
Thank you.
We've had a wonderful session with Gaurav where he's shared his insights, and we would like you to log on to financialexpress.com for all budget related updates, news information and opinions. Please also follow Facebook, Twitter accounts Financial Express.